For the baking unit, I'm going to create a series of videos that break the chapter down from the On Cooking textbook. I'm going to include some additional resources that are a little different than what the textbook offers that I think maybe explain these concepts a little bit better. For the baking unit, I would really love to go into all of the things. I could teach an entire class just on baking, and I could even teach multiple classes if I really got into breaking down different baking. We are only going to be focusing on chapter 30 to wrap this unit up and looking at the principles of the bake shop and the fundamentals. I am here today with my friend, Maisie the dog. Do you see too? Maisie. Say, hi, Maisie. She is very sweet. She's very lovable, but she snores very loudly. So just a heads up on that. She's very comfortable on the love seat, and she gets to snoring. So hopefully that won't be in the background of the video too much. So when we look at the concepts of the baking unit, we're going to be looking at some specialized tools and equipment that are kind of specialized just to baking. Again, I could really go a lot deeper than I'm going to for this introductory level class. We're going to be looking at ingredients and ingredient function. So that's one of the biggest concepts when you're learning about baking anything, is looking at ingredients and ingredient function and some mise en place with those ingredients. We're going to look at the accuracy in measuring, and then we'll look at the mixing methods. So the mixing methods will really come into play, particularly after we talk about the ingredients. This first video, I'm actually going to start here, which comes at the end of the chapter, which is the baking process. So the baking process is going to link the previous lessons that you've been doing on the principles of cooking. And some of that vocabulary is going to come back around as well. So if you open up the baking process here, you can find it here in your textbook. But I'm going to look at the slides that come with your actual textbook here. So if we look at this, if we look at the slides. I don't know that I've recorded a video from, let's see. So I guess I'll just do it this way. So we look at the baking process. A lot of the cooking process is the same as the baking process. You have certain ingredients, heat hits those ingredients, and things begin to grow and things begin to change. So one of the first things that happens is gases form. So we're going to be talking about leavening agents. We're going to be talking about things that make your baked goods rise. And so these would come from the gases that are produced by that. Gases are produced and then they're trapped. So depending on what your product is, some of them might come out, but they stretch the proteins, or the dough captures the gas, and that's how we go from having something flat to having something puffy. Starches gelatinized. So we talked about this in the last chapter. When you start getting around 140 degrees, starches, so your flours, oats, rice, there's grain products, potatoes we talked about last. Vegetables have starches as well. There are some of those, a lot of those are utilized in baking. So they begin to absorb moisture. And when they absorb moisture, they swell with that moisture, and then they grow and then they expand. Proteins coagulate. So we looked at coagulation a little bit in the last unit as well. So proteins are essentially amino acids that are bound together, and I like to talk about it like a chain, like a linked chain. So you have different amino acids, and that they're all linked together. So then you have this protein, and then the protein is also kind of wound up. Like if I took a hair out of my head, and I have a hair that's about this long, and I put it in my hand and I rolled it around, it's going to curl it up. Proteins are like that. So they're all jumbled and they're all bound up. When they denature, they begin to unwind, and heat denatures those proteins, and then we can break down the amino acids. Coagulation is a different rearranging of those protein bonds, and so that's when gluten and dairy and egg, they solidify and they kind of get firmer as well. When I teach the meat units and I look at meat cookery specifically, or when I teach about eggs, more specific, I get a little bit more in detail as far as how that goes on those specific ingredients. Hi, baby. Um, for baking, you want to think about it in terms of eggs. A lot of the times, how an egg goes from having like clear to opaque with the white, and liquid to firm. Fats melt, so we use a lot of different fats in baking, and then they're going to melt, and that's going to create liquids. That's going to moisten things, tenderize things. It's going to shorten gluten strands. We're going to talk about gluten in the flour lesson. And then you have steam, which is water evaporation. So this can also make leaven ingredients and make things rise. This can be a positive. It can also be a negative. You can have some shrinkage. You can also have some drying out. And so some of that can happen pretty quick. You have to be very careful in timing with baking. Sugars are going to caramelize. We talked a lot about caramelization and browning. That's going to create flavors and colors and smells and aromas. Carryover baking. We looked at carryover cooking in the last unit as well. So when you pull things out of the oven, the pan that it's in is hot. The inside of it is going to be hot, and things are going to continue to cook even after they've been removed from the heat. So it's really important to kind of recognize the determining of doneness of baked goods, of the different baked goods, so that you don't overdo it. And then staling, things go stale after they've been baked and they've been cooked, particularly if they're not handled properly. The more air that they're allowed to have, the more stale they're going to have. So they lose moisture and they change in structure, like a nice fresh bread versus stale bread. And there's ways to use like stale baked goods in baking, particularly in a restaurant. I'm actually going to be doing like a lunch service, and I always get French bread that's been marked down at the grocery store. So when they do the day old bread and they mark it down to like half price, I'll buy those loaves of French bread and I'll throw them in the freezer, and then we make lots of various things with that. So if you are looking at going into a restaurant or looking at menu planning, um, connecting some stale baked goods to what you could be doing can be very beneficial, and it can really help monitor those cost control measures and create less waste. All right, let's go back to my controls went off of my screen. It's taking me forever to find the control.